Hey friends, Pastor Daniel here, wanting to share with you just a few of my thoughts about our worship series this month called Unshallow. I'm really excited about it. We're going to be exploring some of the great stories in the book of Genesis, the first book of the Holy Scriptures. They help identify for us who we are as well as God's people, and it's just lots and lots of fun. One of my favorites is the story of Adam and Eve in Genesis chapter 3. You may recall that they were tempted by a serpent, and the serpent sort of helped them to see that the fruit may not be as bad as they thought it was. And so Adam and Eve eat from the fruit, and immediately their eyes are opened, and they begin to discover that they're naked. And if you recall the story, you may remember that once they realized they were naked, they sewed fig leaves for themselves to cover themselves up. And then a little bit later in the story, God comes walking in the garden to try to visit with his creation, and Adam and Eve both try to hide because they're embarrassed and they're ashamed because of their nakedness, and they enter into a conversation with God. I've long been fascinated with this sense of nakedness, right? I don't doubt every last one of us has at some point in our life, usually in childhood, but sometimes in adulthood, had one of those really embarrassing moments, right? When someone caught us bare naked, right? Whether it was that coming out of the shower or somehow you were doing something and you didn't realize somebody had seen you. And it's embarrassing, isn't it? I mean, one of the reasons we have clothes is to protect us from the elements. We are vulnerable to the elements. The other reason, of course, that we wear clothes is we're a little bit vulnerable to what people may think of us or what people may see in us, right? I certainly don't want you to see me naked, right? What's also fascinating about this story is that the Hebrew word that we translate as naked actually has as its meaning, quite literally, to be vulnerable. So when Adam and Eve realized they were vulnerable, they covered themselves up. And when God came around to kind of visit with them, they realized they were vulnerable, and so they wanted to hide. And I think that's the story of our lives, is that we are vulnerable. Every last one of us. We are vulnerable to what people think. We are vulnerable to what people say of us. We are vulnerable to how people feel about us, and certainly us about them. And a part of our goal in the Unshallow series is to recognize that we were originally created to be vulnerable. You see, if you reflect back on that Genesis 3 text, you begin to realize they had already been vulnerable. They just didn't know it until they ate from the fruit. And so what we recognize is that God created us to be vulnerable, to reveal our true selves to one another, to be who we were created to be with and for God. Unfortunately, once we ate from that fruit, we began to hide ourselves. We began to cover our very likeness and the way God intended for us to be. And so during Unshallow, we're going to try to help ourselves better know, what is it like to be genuinely vulnerable? What is it like to have ourselves in intimate relationships that can only genuinely take shape when we are vulnerable one with each other? Friends, I look so forward to being with you throughout the month of September as we share these powerful stories of Adam and Eve and Abraham and Jacob and Joseph, and how they teach us powerful lessons about how we were created to be and why we were created to be in intimate relationships, both with God and with one another. I celebrate your vulnerabilities. I celebrate who we genuinely are created to be. And I pray that we'll seek to be naked with each other in the biblical sense, revealing our true selves and opening ourselves up to the possibilities of God's genuine love and God's powerful truth, that this is who we ought to be, deeply, deeply intimate with one another and with God. I look forward to your being